They called me Lina at home and Lark on the internet. At school I learned to answer to both, like a door with two bells, never sure which one would ring. When I was a child, the mirror over the sink showed me a face that felt borrowed, a pearly shell washed up by mistake. I kept waiting for the rightful owner to knock on the window and ask for it back. Mama worked nights at the laundry on Carnation Avenue. The street smelled like wet coins and softeners. She said the trick to life was timing. Pull the sheet before the heat eats it, smile before the man asks, leave before the light breaks. When I was 9, she braided my hair tight as a secret and said, "You can be anyone if you stop shaking." I practiced stillness the way other kids practiced piano. I learned the math of attention early. Smile equals treat, tears equal silence. An extra spin on the jump rope equals applause from girls who will forget your name in a week. The first video I ever posted was my hands cutting a star out of a brown paper grocery bag. The comments said, "Haunting, aesthetic, who is she?" I liked the question better than any answer I could have given. The city where I grew up pretended to be coastal, though the water was an inlet that never decided if it belonged to the sea. Downtown theater posters blistered on poles in the sun. I took the bus to auditions and learned to say yes in 100 flavors. Yes, I can cry on cue. Yes, I can be 16 or 22. Yes, I can sing if the lights are dim. Yes, I can fall in love at the count of 3. Yes, I can die beautifully. A casting assistant once told me my mouth was archival, like a photograph someone found in a shoebox. He made it a compliment by passing me a script. In the script, the girl walks into a room and every head turns. I practiced the turn in my bedroom, slowing the hinge of my neck until it felt like a tide. When the part aired, people clipped the scene and edited slow violins over my breathing. Lark learned to be realer than Lina. Mama said, "Collect your checks, keep your edge, don't marry a man who makes you laugh until you forget to ask what he wants." I nodded and told her about the director with the small hands who said I had a face like a candle he didn't want to blow out. "Then why does he keep cupping his palm?" she asked. I laughed and nursed the question later, "The way you taste a burn." The studio where I shot my first lead smelled of hot dust and fruit that had been cut and left on a plate. The makeup chair felt like confession. A woman with steady wrists lifted my hair with clips like silver beetles and made me the kind of blonde that lighting loves. Not a color but a temperature. "There," she said, turning me towards the bright. "Now the camera will believe you even when you don't." On the soundstage a white door stood alone, bolted to a frame that touched nothing. Beyond it, painted clouds. The script called it the door to the dream house. In take after take I touched the knob and stepped into light that never warmed my skin. The crew clapped because the scene looked true, not because it was. I learned that truth and likeness are cousins who do not speak at holidays. The first magazine cover used my Lark name in powder blue letters and called me The Afterglow. I bought 3 copies and pressed one under my mattress like a talisman to flatten me into the girl I looked like. The journalist asked me to describe my perfect Sunday. I said something about cinnamon rolls and a book beneath a window. The truth was that Sundays scared me, the way empty rooms do. Fans wrote letters edged with glitter and the difficult kind of love. Unconditional for a person who doesn't exist. I wrote back with careful kindness. "Dear Starling, dear River, dear no one in particular." I signed Lina sometimes by mistake and felt like a thief who'd put down the wrong name on a stolen check. On set they told me to tilt my chin a little more, that's it, the naive angle. The word naive fell like sugar that doesn't melt. There was a boy who only kissed me on rap nights, his mouth tasting faintly of stage smoke and limes. "You're going to be enormous," he said, which felt like both a promise and a threat. I saw myself on bus stop ads, multiplied and glossy. The city returned my face to me in 20-foot versions, like mirrors for someone too tall for the world. In interviews I perfected the trick of shapeshifting into questions. Ask me anything and I will become it. Innocent, iconic, soft, sharp, broken but brave. The only time I faltered was when a woman asked, "When are you most yourself?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. The boom mic made a small hungry sound like a moth beating. The movie that changed my life wasn't the best one. It was the one with the white dress and the red radio. In it, I stand by a window and pretend to recognize the song that saves me. People fell in love with the way I looked at invisible music. They said it was hope. They said it was ruin. I thought it was simply listening hard enough to hear the breath of the machine that was learning me. On the night of the premiere, I wore a gown the color of evaporated milk and pinned my hair to look fragile and inevitable. Flash bulbs stitched me to the evening like sequins. A girl at the velvet rope showed me a drawing of my face. She had given me a crown of lemons. For brightness, she said. I wanted to tell her I grew in shade. After the screening, the director put his arm around my waist as if fastening a belt. "You did it," he said, which meant something like, "You surrendered beautifully." The applause sounded like rain on a tarp, loud but thin. In the hotel mirror later, I saw that I had left a small thumbprint of foundation on my collarbone, a proof of artifice where my skin should have been. Mama called me at 2 in the morning. "Does it feel like yours?" she asked. I looked at the city glittering and husked, a fruit sucked dry and shining. "It feels like they loaned it to me, and tomorrow they might remember they need it back," I said. "Then sleep in it while it's yours," she told me, and her breath crackled like old vinyl. At dawn, I walked barefoot across the room's cold carpet and opened the curtains. The inlet was a dark ribbon, uncommitted to ocean. In the glass I saw Lina and Lark trying to share the same mouth. I told them to be gentle. I told them there would be time to choose. I told them there would be 4 doors ahead, and each would open only once. The first door arrived without hinges. A brand deal, of all things. Lipstick that promised to taste like first love. The campaign wanted a girl who looked like she had just remembered a secret. They filmed me biting the bullet and laughing, then filmed me not laughing at all. Both were beautiful in the monitor. Both were wrong in me. The check cleared before the commercials aired. People stopped me on the street to ask what shade I wore to look like myself. The second door was an apartment with a view of the soundstage roofs, tar paper and gulls, ladders like unfinished sentences. Someone had arranged bowls of green apples on the kitchen island as if they came with the lease. I invited Mama over and we ate one each, wincing at the sour. She walked through the rooms touching walls with the side of her hand. "You're high up," she said. "Make sure the floor knows you." Fame arrived like weather that stayed. Friends learned to lower their voices around me, as if microphones were moths that might be sleeping in my hair. My phone became a small altar, lit with faces I barely knew calling me by names I barely owned. Lark trending, Lark rumored, Lark blowing, Lark crying in a bathroom, not me, but close enough. A man I had never met wrote a 5,000-word essay about the way my eyebrows meant doomed innocence. Another man sold a candle that smelled like my aura. The studio added clauses to my life like quiet cousins moving into a spare room. No bicycles, no late-night diners, no haircuts without notice, smile in airports, decline shots on camera. Decline opinions that have not been cleared. When I wanted to walk alone by the inlet, a car followed at a respectful distance, apologetic as a shadow. I waved at it. It waved back with a turn signal. The third door was a hospital door. Mama lay under a blanket the color of old teeth. The beeping at her bedside sounded like a metronome set to continue. She said she was only tired, that laundry had a way of folding a person from the inside if you weren't careful. I sat with her until the fluorescent lights turned our skin into the same expression. "When they take my blood, I think of the river," she said. "It keeps moving because it doesn't ask who it's for." I kissed her wrist where the tape held. When the tabloids printed a photo of me leaving the hospital with my head down, they captioned it, "Star hides from love." When they printed a photo of me looking up, they wrote, "Star hunts for attention." It was almost funny, the way the world kept finding verbs for a girl who, in truth, was mostly walking and breathing and trying not to break the paper bag of her body. There was a party on a hill where the lawn had its own lighting designer. The house gleamed like a smile with too many teeth. I wore a silver dress that left my shoulders bare to prove I was harmless. In the library, a producer told me the future was a kind of loop. Everyone you meet is someone you will meet again, but more important or more tired. He introduced me to a woman whose face was a rumor I had grown up with. She looked at me kindly, the way an astronaut might look at a cloud. "It's beautiful, Father." I began to dream in sets. A hinge creaking, a mark taped to the floor, someone calling quiet like a prayer. In the dreams, the door to the dream house opened into my kitchen with the green apples. I woke smiling, unsure. I woke to the lens in my mind still open, the iris slow to close. Morning poured itself thin across the floorboards like milk left on a saucer for a cat that never quite arrives. The inlet looked tin foil cold, a strip of light hammered flat by October. I made coffee in the kitchen with the green apples and remembered how the night's dreams had stitched sets to rooms, props to feelings, marks to choices. It felt like being rehearsed by someone I couldn't see. The days after the premiere arranged themselves as if a careful hand were moving them on a board. Calls, fittings, an interview in a hotel with low chairs that made me feel child small. A meeting where men said the word trajectory so often it lost its wings and became a paper plane. I learned the trick of repeating a question back until it turned into an answer. "How does it feel to be a symbol?" they asked. "Like standing very still so other people can point their compass," I said, and they wrote it down. The new film came with a script that arrived in a box as if it were perfume. Tissue paper, a ribbon, the cover printed in a font that wanted to be anonymous. The story was about a girl who becomes the world's favorite ghost while she's still alive. The director said it was not about me at all. The director said it was about America. The director said it was about the algorithm inside our loneliness. I nodded at each sentence as if they were chandeliers I hoped wouldn't fall. On the first day he took my phone and dropped it in a velvet bag labeled silence. "We'll give it back after wrap," he smiled, "or when you're done being observed." He wanted me hungry for attention on camera and allergic to it off. Without the small altar of the screen I felt the air thicken. I could hear the crew breathe. Could hear the hairspray settle like a fine rain on the fake wallpaper. The set was a dollhouse scaled to human sorrow. Its windows were light boxes. Its clock always 3:07. They built me a bedroom that looked like a memory someone polished too hard. A vanity glowing with bulbs that warmed my face the way a lie warms a room. A bed as white as forgetting. On the headboard they carved a pattern of climbing roses, the thorns smoothed down so no one bled. "You'll sleep here between scenes," the AD said. "It matters that we believe you belong to this place. Belonging as a prop, belonging as an unpaid extra." Mama visited once and stood at the threshold like a cat who could smell a glass wall. "Pretty," she said, which meant dangerous. She sat at the vanity and lifted a brush. "When I was your age, I thought mirrors were promises. Now I think they're bills we have to pay." I wanted to joke that mine were on autopay, but her eyes found mine in the bulbs and I swallowed the line. She kissed my cheek and left her print like a watermark in a corner I couldn't dust. The scenes were mostly about waiting. Waiting for the call, the man, the miracle, the public. I learned to wait with my mouth. Hope looks like parted lips. Faith looks like the swallow that follows. Despair looks like red that will not keep to its border. The director hovered beside the lens like a surgeon who prefers poetry to anesthesia. "Less," he would murmur. "Less until the camera starts confessing for you." I discovered a form of crying that leaves no wet, only a brightness like lacquer over wood. In the evenings I rode home in the back of a car that smelled faintly of leather and lemon wipes. City lights smeared on the windows, long and cold as gossip. I watched a compilation on my borrowed assistant's phone, clips of me edited after the premiere, slow-motion turns, looped breaths, stares arranged like rosary beads for someone's private prayer. The captions were confessions from strangers. "Your face feels like a window. Your face feels like a mother. Your face feels like the end of an apology. I scrolled and felt my face detach from my name like a mask left on a chair. There was a photograph, taken without my knowing, of me bending to tie my shoe. The tabloid caption called it a bow. Lark bows to new love, it said, because the camera had also caught shoes beside mine, their laces bright, their owner corrupt. He was an actor with a laugh that burst like a paper bag. He texted me jokes that read like stage directions. Enter charm, exit before sincerity. We went to a diner where the ketchup wore a little hat and ate eggs under a yellow that announced itself as morning. Safe lasted 3 weeks, which is a kind of record. The studio called to say they loved us, which felt like a weather report threatening sunshine. They booked us a spread in a magazine famous for turning couples into myths with a shelf life. The day of the shoot they brought a dog, because people like to imagine that love is the kind of thing that makes room on a couch. I smiled until my back muscles wrote a complaint letter to my spine. He kissed my temple and the photographer said, "Yes, perfect, she is the ache and the answer." On set, the dream house demanded rent. Night shoots that turned my blood into tea. Stunts that looked gentle until the bruise. An intimacy coordinator who spoke like a yoga teacher while fitting me with pasties shaped like invisibility. Consent is choreography, she said, and I wanted to believe. The scene required me to pretend to be asleep while a man pretended to watch my sleeping. When the camera moved in, I felt its attention like a fingertip brushing my lashes. Later, watching playback, the director said, "Hold there," and I obeyed because the room asked for it. Rumors grew like mold on bread left in a heatwave. They said I couldn't remember lines. They said I could remember everyone's lines and made a habit of mouthing them, a crime of care. They said I demanded champagne at breakfast and forgiveness at dinner. They said I fell asleep standing up like a horse. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing. I was tired and afraid of the minutes between people. One afternoon I slipped off set and walked to the inlet, the car idling behind me like a thought I couldn't stop thinking. The water was the color of a coin someone swallowed by accident. Gulls skittered like paper napkins. A girl recognized me and asked for a video for her mother. She had a hard week, the girl said. The love in her voice was the kind that makes you feel counterfeit. I recorded a message about mornings getting kinder, about the body as a library that will forgive overdue returns. The girl teared up and hugged me so quickly that I made a sound like a bell. Mama's health wavered like a radio station between towns. Some days clear, some days she turned her head toward a voice inside the noise and I could not hear it. I read to her from the script because the present felt too thin to carry conversation. She liked the parts where the girl ate toast. That, Mama said, tapping the page, is what people believe in. Toast, not miracles. She slept and I counted her breaths like a stage manager of one. The boy from Rap Nights returned as if he were scheduled, except now he brought silence that asked to be filled. "You're different," he said, which is something people say when your outline changes but they have not adjusted their sight. He touched the back of my wrist as if reading a pulse through paper. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked. I told him the truth, that wanting had become atmospheric, something I moved through rather than felt. He kissed my throat and said, "You sound like weather." The director decided the girl should cut her hair in Act 2, as if shedding strands would recalibrate the soul. He asked if I would do it myself, live, first take, because he believed in risk the way some men believe in faith. I sat at the vanity under the bulbs and lifted the scissors. The first snip sounded like a zipper on a dress you'll never zip again. The hair fell in obedient commas to the floor. The crew went very quiet, the way people do at weddings and in storms. After, in the holding room that pretended to be a kitchen, I watched the monitor show a version of me who looked lighter and more doomed. People congratulated me for my bravery with eyes that measured future awards. I swept the hair into a trash bag and carried it to the bin myself because it felt wrong to ask anyone else to throw out what used to be part of my face. A PA stopped me and asked for a handful for his girlfriend's art project. "She makes birds out of hair," he said. They look so alive. I gave him a handful, then washed my palms and watched the stray strands cling to the sink like tiny question marks. At home, the green apples had shifted from tart to sweet to a soft that meant decision. I baked them with cinnamon and watched the oven light. I ate one standing, then another until the ache of sugar met the ache of day and the two nodded at each other like passengers on a late bus. Truly. Why? The morning the velvet bag finally returned my phone, I turned it on and the screen spilled over with gatherings. News of a law passed far away. A friend's newborn, ears folded like secrets. A director's public apology to a woman I didn't know. A message from my agent with a link to a think piece titled "The Girl Who Is Too Much and Not Enough." A text from Mama. Toast today. I hearted it like prayer. I thought that would be the end of the matter, the hair, the hunger, the gentle doom. But the city is a machine that learns your steps as surely as a lover learns your size. It built me a path between two doors I had not yet seen. When I reached for the knob, the cold metal looked up at me like an eye. I told myself I would open it only once. I told myself the camera wasn't on. I told myself a small, unconvincing story about choices that wait. The door opened on silence disguised as applause. It was the wrap party for the film, though the room looked like a wake. Balloons in metallic colors hovered like exhausted thoughts. Someone had written her name, Lark, on a cake so glossy it reflected the overhead bulbs like surveillance cameras. The director raised a toast about transformation and truth, and the champagne fizzed too fast, dying in midair. When she smiled for photos, her cheeks felt like they were wearing separate lives. Every flash made her blink slower. Her co-star whispered, "We made art." She nodded, because it was easier than saying she didn't know what art was anymore. The shooting or the pretending, the bruise or the filter. Outside, rain blurred the palm trees painted on the restaurant windows. A girl approached her, trembling with the nervous brightness of someone meeting a ghost. "You saved me," the girl said. "When I saw your face in that film, I stopped wanting to disappear." Lark tried to hold that sentence like something warm. "I'm glad," she said. "Don't disappear, okay?" The girl laughed, quick and strange. "I won't if you don't." The driver waited in the car, engine humming like a heart that doesn't want to rest. On the ride home, Lark looked out at the city where her face glowed on billboards, hair cropped short, lips pale and dangerous. She wondered if the wind recognized her anymore. At the apartment, she undressed slowly, as though peeling herself out of a roll. The mirror caught her, collarbones sharp as punctuation, eyes half lit. For a moment, she looked for the camera, then laughed when she remembered she was alone. She slept badly. The dreams were full of crowds, thousands of hands rising in rhythm, not to cheer but to measure her. The next morning, she woke to find the curtains half open, the sky flat, the inlet a dull bruise. The silence was large enough to hold her whole body. Mama called. Her voice was thinner now, as if stretched through distance. "How's the movie?" "It's done," Lark said. "And you?" "Still filming, I think." Mama chuckled softly. "Baby, you can stop pretending anytime." Lark wanted to say she didn't know how. The pretending had become the breathing. The new campaign. The studio had already arranged the next step, a global perfume launch. The fragrance was called Stillness. The slogan, "Be seen by scent alone." During the commercial shoot, a stylist spritzed the air until everyone was dizzy. "This will be your rebirth," the brand director said. "Less girl, more myth." They built a mirrored corridor, floor to ceiling, an endless maze of herself. Lark walked barefoot across it in a white silk dress that cost more than her mother's car. Cameras tracked her reflection from every side. "Look at yourself as if you're seeing someone you loved and lost," the director said. She did. The reflection almost smiled back. The final cut went viral. People wrote think pieces about the vulnerability in her eyes, the fragility of her beauty, the loneliness in her half-open mouth. Someone slowed the footage to 1/8 speed and added piano. Comments called it holy, transcendent, tragic. She read them all until the words became static. The perfume sold out in 2 days. You're everywhere, her agent said. Lark thought. That means nowhere. The studio apartment. After Mama's health dipped again, Lark moved her into the city. A one-bedroom with a balcony that smelled of exhaust and jasmine. Lark filled the fridge with soft foods, arranged flowers near the bed, and pretended it was enough. Mama watched her from the pillow, smiling faintly. You look thinner. I'm fine. You sound hollow. I'm echoing, that's all. They watched old movies on mute. Mama laughed at the exaggerated gestures. The way actors once believed emotion had to be thrown rather than whispered. You remind me of them, she said. You act even when no one's looking. Lark looked at her hands. I don't know how not to. At night she sat on the balcony smoking the cigarettes she pretended to have quit. Below, sirens stitched through the streets, neon smeared across puddles. In the apartment behind her, Mama coughed, and Lark whispered a promise that wasn't a prayer. One more job, then rest. One more, then I'll stop. The offer. It came wrapped in flattery and danger. A biopic. The story of a 1950s starlet who lost her mind on screen. The producers called it, A Mirror Turned Backward. Lark hesitated. Isn't it too close? That's why it's perfect, they said. She read the script alone, at 2 in the morning, under the yellow light of the kitchen. Each page felt like déjà vu. The woman's exhaustion, her hunger to be adored, her slow unraveling. At the end, the character walks into the ocean wearing diamonds. Lark closed the script and whispered, I already know how it ends. Still, she signed. The spiral. The shoot began in winter. The studio wanted controlled isolation, so they rented a house in the desert where phone signals broke like thin ice. Lark stayed there for 6 weeks with the crew, sleeping in the same bed as her character, wearing replicas of her clothes, repeating her breakdown until it became muscle memory. Between takes, she walked barefoot on the sand that burned even at night. The wind whispered through the dunes like a language without vowels. She tried to remember what her real voice sounded like. One afternoon she fainted under the lights. The medic said dehydration, the director said method. When she came to, everyone was applauding her realism. The tabloids began their feeding. Lark losing touch, one headline read. Star collapses mid-shoot, too deep in role? Another paper published a blurry photo of her crying in a parking lot. It wasn't her, but it didn't matter. The idea was enough. Online, the narrative split in two. Half called her brave, half called her broken. Both were watching. Mama's goodbye. The call came at dawn. Lark flew home in silence, the plane humming like an apology. Mama looked smaller than memory, her hands folded like old paper. She opened her eyes long enough to say, I saw you on TV. You looked like light trying to remember it was fire. Lark cried, quietly, because the nurse was changing sheets. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For not being there. You were always there, Mama said. Just in too many places at once. When the monitors flattened, Lark didn't move. The nurse touched her shoulder, gentle as punctuation. At the funeral, fans left flowers shaped like stars. A man asked for a selfie beside the grave. She let him. It felt easier than refusing. The collapse. Back on set, she was supposed to film the drowning scene, the one everyone said would win awards. The ocean was cold and bright, the camera anchored like a confession booth. The director explained her cue. You'll walk in until the water takes you. Don't fight it, just surrender. She nodded. The first take felt like baptism. The second, like memory. The third, like absence. When she surfaced, the sky was violet, the crew cheering. She smiled so they wouldn't see the shiver. Someone wrapped her in a blanket. Someone else whispered that was real. That night, alone in her trailer, she replayed the footage. The woman on screen looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Lark turned off the monitor and stared at the wall. The silence pressed close, familiar as breath. Her phone vibrated with messages, condolences, congratulations, brand deals. She turned it face down. In the mirror above the sink, The makeup half washed away. She saw both names flicker behind her eyes. Lina, Lark, neither. The line between them had melted. Outside, the desert wind sang through the cracks in the trailer, sounding almost like applause. She laughed once, softly, because the sound of it felt like someone else's memory. Then she whispered, as if to no one, "I'm ready to be real now." The wind carried the words away. And somewhere, the camera kept rolling. I remember the last morning clearly, because everything was too gentle to feel real. The desert sky looked painted on, pale as the inside of a seashell. My coffee steamed in its paper cup, rising like breath from a tired soul. The crew moved quietly around me, speaking in a new kind of whisper, the whisper used for someone already halfway to legend. The film was nearly finished. The final scene, they said, would close the arc. I didn't ask whose. The trailer door opened, spilling sunlight across the floor like a spill of gold dust. The assistant called, "We're ready when you are, Lark." She said it kindly, and that kindness hurt more than anything. The ocean scene. The drive to the coast took 4 hours. We left the desert behind like a burnt-out candle and reached the cliffs just as the tide began to climb. The sea was loud, enormous, restless, everything I wasn't allowed to be. The costume designer fussed with the dress, pinning it so it would float right when the waves lifted it. Silk the color of moonlight, cold against my skin. "You'll be beautiful," she said, as though beauty was armor. The director came to me quietly. "Remember," he said, "you don't have to fight the water. Just let it hold you. The camera will understand." He said the camera will understand, not I will. And that, somehow, felt honest. When the clapperboard snapped, everything went white with sound. I stepped into the surf, feeling the chill rise to my knees, my ribs, my heart. The horizon blurred. The light made a crown of salt around my hair. I heard someone call, "Perfect. Keep walking," and for a heartbeat I believed it wasn't acting anymore. The water closed over me like a sentence ending in silence. Cut. Applause. I came up gasping, smiling because that was expected. They wrapped me in towels, told me it was magic, told me I had given them something immortal. The producer's eyes glistened with profit. That night they drank champagne on the beach. I sat apart, watching the foam dissolve around the rocks. The moon had the same face it always did, but I swear it looked like it was pretending too. The aftermath. When the film released, it wasn't a premiere, it was a coronation. Lark ascends, the headline said. The performance of a generation. Pain so beautiful you'll forget it's real. I did interviews on autopilot, each answer polished until it no longer fit the question. "How did you prepare for such an emotional role?" someone asked. I stopped pretending that pretending wasn't real, I said, and they laughed like it was poetry. The movie broke records. My face filled entire cities again. Billboards, perfume ads, bus stops, phone wallpapers. A woman on the street once bowed to me as if I'd blessed her. I wanted to tell her that I was the one still waiting for forgiveness. Mama's old phone kept ringing in my head even after it had been turned off for months. That faint, tinny tone, like something that refused to admit it had been disconnected. I tried to sleep, but every dream was a set. Every morning began with imaginary applause fading into traffic noise. I moved through days like a ghost haunting her own biography. The return. One dawn I drove to the inlet where it all began, the water still half committed, half forgetting itself. The sun hadn't risen yet, the air smelled of iron and rain. I took off my shoes and walked the shoreline, feeling the cold chew at my toes. No cameras, no makeup, no script, just the sound of wind trying to say my name. A fisherman nearby recognized me. "You're that actress," he said. "My wife loves your movie." "I'm not her anymore," I replied. He squinted at me. "Sure you are. The face doesn't lie. But faces do. They're trained to." He went back to his nets, humming. I sat on a rock and thought about Mama's advice. "You can be anyone if you stop shaking." I had stopped shaking. I'd simply forgotten how to move. The photograph. A week later, an email arrived from the studio. Press day, final contract meeting, new endorsement opportunities. I didn't answer. Instead, I found my old Polaroid camera in a drawer. It still worked. I walked around the apartment, photographing the unremarkable. An apple core, a glass half full, sunlight crawling across a chair. Then I turned the lens on myself. Click. The film slid out, slow and uncertain. I watched my own face bloom on the paper like a ghost developing memories. No stylist, no lens filter, just Lina, the girl who once cut stars out of grocery bags. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I pinned that photograph on the fridge, between an unpaid bill and Mama's hospital bracelet. The combination looked almost holy. The offer that ended it. They sent a courier with flowers and a letter. A streaming platform wanted to produce a docuseries about my rise and redemption. The title was already chosen, Becoming Lark. I laughed. It sounded like an obituary written in advance. Still, I met them once. In a glass office overlooking a skyline full of my own advertisements, the executive spoke with careful enthusiasm. "It's a chance to show your truth," one said. "It's therapy," said another. "It's brand management," said the third, the only honest one. I listened, then asked quietly, "If I tell the truth, will anyone believe me?" They blinked, as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "Of course," said the first. "We'll have editors for that." When I left the building, I realized I was smiling, not the kind they'd trained me for, but the tired kind that comes after surviving something enormous. I didn't sign. The vanishing. People said I vanished. The tabloids used words like retreat and rehab. Fans posted timelines of my last appearances, circling photos like detectives studying ghosts. The truth was smaller. I moved to a small town near the coast, the kind of place where fog arrives before thought. I rented a house with creaking floors and a stove that refused to light. The first morning, I opened the window and smelled the sea. It didn't recognize me either, and that felt merciful. I began taking photographs again, of strangers, of broken shells, of the light between hours. The local gallery owner bought one, titled it, Untitled Woman. He asked for a bio. I said, just right. She used to be seen. The days slowed. I learned the shapes of silence. Birds came to the window each dawn, pecking the glass softly, as if reminding me I was still inside something. Sometimes, when the tide came high enough, I'd walk down to the beach at night. The moon would drag silver over the waves. I'd whisper Mama's words to the wind. "Sleep in it while it's yours." The letter. Months passed before I found the courage to open the last envelope Mama had left in her drawer. Her handwriting wobbled but remained certain. "Lina, you don't owe the world your soul. It already has your reflection. Find a small life and live it big. Eat toast. Watch the sky. And if they ever call you back to be someone else, tell them you've already been everyone once. Love, Mama." The paper smelled faintly of lavender and detergent. I folded it into my pocket and carried it everywhere like a second heart. The final frame. One evening, I was walking home through fog so thick it felt like a curtain call. A boy recognized me, no older than 20. "Are you really her?" he asked. "Who?" "The actress. Lark." I smiled. "She's gone." He looked disappointed. "She was beautiful." "She still is," I said. "Just harder to find." He nodded, not understanding, and ran off toward the light. I stood there, listening to the sea breathe in the distance. The fog wrapped around me, soft and endless. Somewhere, cameras might still be rolling. Somewhere, my face might still be selling the perfume of silence. But here, barefoot on the wet sand, hair wild, dress salt-stained, I was no longer performing. The tide reached my ankles. The wind smelled of new beginnings. For once, I didn't need to be still. I walked into the sound of the waves and let them carry the name Lark away. The sky darkened, the stars blurred, and the world held its breath, not for applause, but for peace. And in that quiet frame, I was finally real. Fog has a way of teaching patience. It arrives like a careful hand over the eyes and says, "Name what you can't see." In the town by the coast, I learned to say, gull, bell, someone's laughter carried wrong by wind, a boat thinking about leaving. I learned the trick of waiting without wanting. Coffee steamed in a chipped mug. The stove coughed before agreeing to burn. The radio, when it found a station, played old songs that seemed to know my secrets without accusing me of them. The locals called me Lina because that was the name I offered, small as a pebble. Some of them knew the other name from posters curling on bus shelters 100 miles away. But kindness in small towns is often the art of not saying the loudest thing you know. I photographed the ordinary until it grew strange again. A line of clothespins holding nothing, the bruise-colored sky before a storm. A child's sock abandoned on a fence like a flag of truce. The gallery man, who always wore salt on his cuffs like epaulets, asked if I would show more. People come in and stare at the untitled, he said, meaning the one of the empty chair in winter light. They say it looks like the moment before someone forgives someone else. I hope they do, I said. What would you call this next set? He asked. Not yet, I said, and felt the title rest in me like a calm animal. I wrote letters I never mailed to Mama. In them I described toast that burned just right, gulls that argued like uncles, my feet toughening from walking barefoot to the tide line. I pressed seaweed between pages of a notebook and wrote, under each frond, alive, alive, alive. I kept her last letter folded into a square and carried it in my pocket so often that my jeans learned the shape of it. One morning a group of film students arrived, all elbows and ideals. They recognized me without making me say anything and stood on the sand with a reverence I didn't know what to do with. Their teacher, a woman whose voice could slice or soothe, said, "We're studying the ethics of looking." She glanced toward the sea. It felt rude not to ask the person we've all rehearsed on. I laughed because truth, when offered like bread, is impossible to refuse. We sat in a circle on damp towels and talked about cameras as if they were relatives. The generous aunt, the busybody cousin, the grandfather who remembers everything but insists on his own version. They asked how to act without being eaten. I told them the only thing I knew. If the lens feels like God, teach it to blink. One of the students, a boy whose hands shook like leaves, asked what to do when people wanted you to be someone you couldn't carry anymore. Put that person somewhere safe, I said. Give them a room with good light and clean sheets and visit when you have strength. Thank them for getting you across the years. Then go outside. They wrote it down as if I were scripture. I told them it was just practical. After class, the teacher walked with me to the jetty. She had the narrow patience of someone who has taught teenagers to thread needles. There's a screening next month, she said. They're doing a program on after. You should come. After what? Exactly, she smiled. I went, because beginnings can be shy and arrive disguised as invitations. The screening was in a community hall where the projector wheezed like an asthmatic dragon and the chairs were enthusiastic about squeaking. The films were tender, lopsided, alive. A grandmother teaching her grandson to braid garlic. A man writing an apology on the beach and watching the tide read it. A dancer learning to move again after metal found a home in her bones. When the lights rose, nobody clapped the way people clap for celebrities. They clapped the way people clap for neighbors who told the truth. On the walk home, I realized I had not once felt watched. I had only felt seen. I began to make a small film of my own, without permission or hurry. I borrowed the hall on Wednesdays when the bingo group was done and taped paper over the windows to make the room tender to light. I asked people to bring the sound of something they loved. A fisherman arrived with a bucket of water and poured it from one bucket to another until the room remembered rain. A hairdresser brought her shears and made a choir of snips. A retired nurse came with a bag of pulse oximeters and laughter. I filmed their hands, their pauses, the way they breathed between memories. I did not put myself in it, except for a cameo where my shadow crossed the wall while I adjusted the focus. When I watched the rushes at night, kettle singing, tide muttering its old lesson, I heard Mama in my head. Find a small life and live it big. The film didn't have a story that anyone could summarize, which felt like a relief. It had a shape, like fog lifting. I called it, people, learning to stay. Word, like tide, finds its level. A programmer at a modest festival asked to show it. I said yes and sent the file from the town's library where the internet wore house slippers. On the day of the screening I stayed home and washed my windows. When the programmer wrote afterward, the audience breathed with it. I stood on a chair and looked at the see-through glass that finally admitted it was glass. I breathed with it too. Letters continued to find me, forwarded from lost addresses. Some were fierce with love that had nowhere else to go. Some were upset at my absence, as if I had stolen a character from a story mid-chapter. I answered some in pencil and left some unopened, the way you leave a room in a house you no longer live in exactly as it was, so memory has somewhere to sit. I kept a box for Lina and a box for Lark. In Lina's I put the Polaroids, the shells, the museum ticket with, admit one, faded to a pale ache. In Lark's I put a lipstick the color of forgiveness and a perfume sample that smelled like static. Some days I moved the boxes around like furniture in a new apartment, looking for where the light treated them kindly. Some days I set them side by side and felt the floor know me. Grief, which had been stalking me in couture, changed into work clothes and started helping. It held the ladder while I changed a bulb. It carried the heavy side of the laundry basket. It sat on the porch steps at dusk and did not ask me to entertain it. When I wept, it handed me the good towel. When I laughed, it did not remind me of my previous statements on sorrow. We learned to share a kitchen. The town threw an equinox parade that would have embarrassed a city, cardboard crowns, a dragon made of bedsheets, a marching band committed to the key of almost. I took photographs until my camera strap dug a soft necklace into my neck. A little girl dressed as the moon saw me, decided moons and unknown women should be friends, and offered me a paper star with glue still tacky on its edge. "It's for your ceiling," she said, "so you remember where night begins." I stuck the star above my bed. At 3 in the morning, when the tide says things only the broken can hear, I watched it and thought about the first mirror over the sink, about a face that once felt borrowed. This one, I kept. Occasionally, news from the old world arrived like weather. A headline about someone I once knew apologizing for a harm they had monetized. An award show where my name floated in a montage like a fish in a lit tank. A rumor that I was on a mountain learning to bake, which owed the world only its wrong verbs. I declined the calls that offered redemption for lease. I was busy, which is to say I was alive in a way that didn't require witnesses. The students returned in spring for another residency. Their teacher brought sourdough wrapped in cloth and questions wrapped in humility. "May we interview you?" they asked. Not about the before, about the now. We set up a camera on the jetty, its tripod legs braced like a creature learning balance. The teacher asked me to clap for sync. I did, and the sound startled a gull into the air. We laughed. The gull scolded us in its language of commas. The first question was simple. "What do you love today?" "Toast," I said, and the teacher's eyes softened with recognition. Also the way strangers carry delicate things without knowing they're delicate. The way fog apologizes without words. The first 5 minutes after the kettle sings. And names, how they hold rooms. "Which name holds you now?" she asked, and her voice was a net that did not tangle. "All of them," I said. "But none by the throat." They packed up with the efficient tenderness of people who respect the weather. Before they left, the trembling boy, his hands steadier this year, offered me a postcard of a lighthouse drawn in ink. On the back he had written, "Thank you for teaching us to blink." I put it in my pocket with Mama's letter, 2 papers beating time. That night the town's one cinema, closed for years except for storms, when it served as a shelter, opened its doors for a single show. They projected my small film on a wrinkled screen, and neighbors watched themselves listening to themselves. Someone sobbed at the sound of water being poured from one bucket to another. Someone snorted when the pulse oximeter duet hit a surprisingly tender chord. When the lights came back, no one looked at me. They looked at each other. Walking home under a sky that had misplaced its stars, I realized the lens had taught me one last lesson: to look without hunger. I stood at the tide line and let the waves decide how much of me they wanted. When they retreated, they took with them a little salt, a little old perfume, a little of the part of me that had lived under glass. In the morning I developed the last roll of film from the parade. In the final frame, by accident or mercy, I had caught my own reflection in a shop window, soft, out of focus, half laughing at something off to the side. On the glass, above my shoulder, the hand-lettered sign read, "Open when needed." I pinned that photograph beside the Polaroid on the fridge. Two women, both true, both in rooms with nice light. I kissed my fingers and touched each frame, the way you touch the doorway of a house that taught you how to leave. When the first storm of summer arrived, the town gathered sandbags like heirlooms. We sealed doorways, we ferried pets, we brewed coffee by candle. In the hallway of the shelter cinema, a child pressed a glow-in-the-dark sticker into my palm. "A star. For your other ceiling," she whispered, conspiratorial. "Just in case." I went outside while the rain argued its beautiful argument with the earth. I lifted my face to it and did not perform. The storm did not applaud. It went about its work. So did I. And if somewhere, far away, a screen still plays the ocean scene that turned a life into a legend, let it. Legends are borrowed. Mornings are kept. I walked home barefoot, carrying bread in my coat like a smuggled sunrise, the glow star warming in my fist. The tide would be high by night, and the fog would come touch the windows with its blind, gentle hands. I would tape that small star above the other, and in the dark they would whisper to each other, and to me. Not applause. Presence. Morning arrives differently now. It doesn't burst in like it used to on film sets. No crew, no shouted places, no curtain of makeup between me and the day. It just seeps through the window, soft and honest, lighting the dust that dances above my coffee cup. Outside, the sea is low and quiet. The gulls have stopped mistaking my roof for a stage. I take that as a kind of peace. I walk down to the shore barefoot, feeling the sand give and return, the simplest rhythm in the world. Every step erases itself, the way good memories do when they've finally been lived enough. People in town have stopped whispering when they pass me. I'm not her anymore, or maybe I am, just rearranged, light without the lens. Sometimes tourists ask, "Didn't you used to be someone?" And I say, "Still am." They laugh. So do I. It's not bitterness anymore, it's a secret handshake with the past. I keep the 2 stars above my bed, one paper, one glowing, both fading a little more each week. The glue has begun to dry and crack. I don't fix it. I like the impermanence, proof that even light peels, even beauty sheds. On the dresser stands my old camera, the same Polaroid that once caught the moment I found my face again. The battery's nearly dead, but sometimes I take one last photo, never of myself, only of light falling across the room, or the curve of steam above tea, or the reflection of the tide in a broken window pane. Each one looks different, but somehow they all say the same thing: here. Still here. Last night, the teacher from the film class called. She told me the students had screened their final projects. "You'd be proud," she said. They all blinked. That made me laugh. After the call, I walked outside. The air was thick with the smell of salt and rain. I could hear the ocean, patient and alive, folding itself into the dark. I thought of Mama then, her voice soft as laundry steam, her hands smelling of starch and hope. "You can be anyone if you stop shaking." I smiled and whispered into the wind, "Look, Mama, I finally learned to stay still for myself." The days are shorter now, but fuller. I bake. I write in the margins of old books. I send postcards to no one, signed with both my names, Lina and Lark, side by side like 2 footprints heading in the same direction. Sometimes, when the sky burns gold before dusk, the light comes through my window just right, and for a second the room feels cinematic again, glowing edges, soft shadow, breath caught mid-frame. But there's no director now, no take numbers, no waiting for approval. Only the sound of the tide counting time, only my heartbeat keeping pace. In the last photo I ever take, I turn the camera toward the sea. The frame catches the horizon bending, the sky melting into the water, and a single gull, blurred in motion. Proof that life doesn't pose for us. When the picture develops, it's imperfect, overexposed at the edges, but it feels alive. I pin it beside the others on the wall, my private gallery of quiet things, and whisper to the empty room, that's the one. Then I open the window, let the salt wind fill the house, and watch the curtains breathe. No applause, no cameras, only the sound of the waves, steady and sure. The same world that once watched me perform now watches me live, and does not demand a close-up. And as the last light folds itself into evening, I understand what Mama meant all along. You don't need to shine to be seen. You just need to be here, fully, freely, finally real.